everyone. So great to join you once again for another episode of Hot Topics. Today, we're going to be speaking about cancel culture, also known as call out culture, often employed in digital spaces to ostracize those who are believed to have perpetuated a form of injustice. At times, we've seen that this can happen without an official ruling from a credible body, thus allowing for much unwarranted canceling. Though cancel culture has helped to a certain degree, it however poses an ethical dilemma for us as Christians, as it often allows little to no room for grace, condemning those deemed as perpetuators of injustice eternally. Social media trials have helped advance justice. For instance, the public pressure exerted by social media around various trials. It has helped mobilize communities against bullies, though at times it has been wrongfully used to accuse people who have not committed any wrong. When we speak of cancel culture, you may remember names of famous people who have been cancelled. You may remember names of athletes. You may remember names of political figures who have been cancelled by society. And the question we want to explore today is, where do we stand as Christians in call out culture? And so, to help us explore this topic, we are joined by Zena, who will introduce the panel and allow them an opportunity to give their opinion on what their thought and heart is around this topic of cancel culture. Thank you, Zena.
Hi, everybody. It's so good to be back again on another episode of Hot Topics. I'm really looking forward to getting into conversation about cancel culture and what it means to us on a personal level, and also what it means to us on a level of Christianity and the church at large. I'm joined by some incredible people. We have Nobi with us, who's an artist and who's also having studied at Stellenbosch. We're joined by Sims Kula, who usually joins us in the worship team, so it's great to have you. And Barry is back with us again this week to share some more insights on online spaces. Now, cancel culture is a very, I would say, interesting topic to bring up in conversation, especially in a space such as this one, because I feel like a lot of people can be triggered by the word cancel. And if you don't know what cancel means, it means to completely draw something out of existence, to completely ostracize and leave out. Now, in this particular instance, when we're looking at social media specifically, we see cancel culture being something that has become more and more popular nowadays, just because we see that lots of topics are brought up at hand to make sure that things are brought to justice, as well as people are called out in ways that we can begin to start normalizing certain conversations to happen in the spaces that we're in. Now, on social media, we've seen that cancel culture has become a norm. If someone is doing something wrong, we want to call them out, we want to cancel them. As Tony had mentioned, there's a lot of artists who have been cancelled, political figures, even normal people on a day-to-day basis are being cancelled merely because of actions and things like that. But what we're going to do today is we're going to unpack what it means to be cancelled, why is it important, or why is it essential that we do bring up certain conversations and hold people accountable, and not necessarily completely ostracize them from society, because at the end of the day, they are people of God. They are people that God created in the same way he created you and I. So we need to, as Christians and people who believe in loving your neighbor, we need to start having conversations that are going to help those who are feeling as though they are cancelled, bring them to light, and maybe understanding what their journey has been. So my first question to the panel today is, what does cancel culture mean for you as an individual in your personal capacity?
I think anyone can go. We're not going to structure it.
Yeah.
Please go for it.
Okay, I think I will start. So thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. As has been said, I think it's such an incredibly important conversation, specifically in the world that we live in today, specifically because of the fact that the world is moving into a new way of being. I think I see the world as this entity or this way of life that's constantly transforming, and as human beings, some of us are maybe transforming with it, while some of us are probably still behind and trying to grapple with the new old world order that's starting to exist and the world that we knew before this. So I think I want to premise this by saying that I am a human being. I have my flaws, I have my faults, I have my imperfections, I have my own ideologies, my own way of being, my own way of thinking, that I hold very true and very dear to my heart. And at the same time, I found myself in spaces where I truly believe that something should be this way or should be thought about in this kind of way, which leads to me having very strong feelings and very strong opinions about various situations or various topics that we find ourselves in. Secondly, I think that it's important as a human being and as an imperfect human being for me to acknowledge the fact that, I have my own lived experiences, which have then contributed to cultivating the person that I am today and how I'm able to sort of navigate the world of social media, but more so the world of sort of cancel culture. So when I think of cancel culture, I think of the fact that, we live in a world where every single individual has their own lived experience. Every single individual has their own way of thinking, their own way of being, and their own way of doing. But now we find ourselves sort of in this vacuum of social media where everything that one says, everything that one does is ultimately seen. We're living in a world now because of technology where we're all constantly being seen, regardless of if we want to be seen or not. I mean, you see this on Twitter when someone will literally just post, "Oh, I'm so hungry today," or "Oh, today I decided to have ice cream." And it's just like that simple statement, but everyone is being able to see that. So I think when we think of cancel culture, then we think of the fact that, conversations or things that people would usually say behind doors, they've now sort of been given this platform, under the premise or under the idea of this freedom of speech or this freedom of expression, where they're able to say what they want to say. So I think that cancel culture it's a very complex thing because I myself have participated in cancel culture. There are things that I've seen on social media that I've been very disheartened by, and I felt very strongly by it, and I've immediately been like, you know what, this is wrong and I'm done with that, and I will not follow this person, or I will not engage myself with this person or affiliate myself with this way of thinking or this way of being whatsoever. And at the time, as much as maybe cancel culture is a way of ostracizing people, at the time it felt right, okay? But then you think about it and you start to see different things happening in the world, different ways of people understanding and being, and you think to yourself, life is so complex and we all have these different lived experiences and ways of being. So I think that cancel culture, what I think it should be is firstly, what Zena said, is being able to hold people accountable, but secondly, with holding people accountable, leaving space for growth to happen. Because at the end of the day, if the world is constantly transforming and changing, how do we expect people to transform and change with the world if we're just canceling them and not actually giving them that space to grow, that space to understand that why maybe their ideology or their way of being or what they've said is actually not right, why is it not right, and where to from here? So I think that right now cancel culture doesn't give us any solutions, and we need to move ourselves from a canceling culture whereby it's done to a canceling culture that's like, you know what, this is what was said, this is why it's wrong, where to from here. So yeah, thank you so much.
Sure. Your thoughts, Barry Sims?
Well, if I may just comment on what's just been said, I think what you say is very, very important. But I'll come back to what I said last week. I think part of the social media problem that we face today is that we've simplified language to such an extent that we actually misconstrue what people are communicating. So it's a principle that I refer to as complexity versus simplicity. If you tell a story, and generally if we've got enough time and enough space to articulate properly what we want to say, people understand us. But if you were, and I think that's the problem with social media, is we keep everything down to little texts or little sound bites that don't give you the depth of narrative that actually helps you to understand, or the reader to understand your point of view. So that's why on social media, a small comment, especially on Twitter, can be blown out of all proportion because you add your context to it and your experience to it, as opposed to the experience and the context with which the other person wrote it. And as a result of that, you get this incredible conflict that is caused by what's put on social media. And I think this is really why we are finding so much conflict, because cancel culture is about conflict. It's about what you've mentioned already. It's about the fact that my experience is different to yours. The thing is that cancel culture is just another word of for what we used to refer to as disapproval. But when everybody else disapproves, the weight of that disapproval cancels that person's opinion. And it also cancels his experience. Now imagine, I cancel your experience, I cancel your opinion, I cancel you. Where's my identity? So what happens is that cancel culture removes the identity of the person eventually, because especially next time he makes a comment, whether it's good or bad, or she makes a comment, whether it's good or bad, that person is a pariah, because you know what? They were cancelled. So everything that they say beyond that is not just judged, it's just not looked at. So I think the language issue is what I'm referring to as part of the problem of social media.
Sure. When I was first told that we were going to talk about cancel culture today, I was actually like, it was obvious for me that I was definitely against cancel culture. But then, I mean, I did my research and I also like read up about a few things, and I think we're making cancel culture a bit too simplistic. I think we're looking at it from a very base level. I think um, I think right now I don't think I'm actually either pro cancel culture or against uh, cancel culture, merely because I think I understand where it comes from, and I think the problem with it was that we as people have always been lynching people. Like the only difference now is that we're doing it on a digital space. But like I stay in town, Joburg, bro. Like if someone is going to like steal something from someone else, rest assured his life is at stake by everyone else, right? We're all going to make sure that we get him, and we're going to do mob justice or whatever that's very similar to whatever cancel culture is. But I get it. I think the root of the problem, I don't think cancel culture is the problem. I think the problem is how we deal with things as society. I think government has failed its society. I feel um, what we have in place and how we deal with our problems is the problem. And I think cancel culture is trying to negate that. Cancel culture is trying to say, hey, listen, the processes that we currently have to fix things that are happening in our world or in our country or in our spaces are currently not working. And actually, right now, the problem is this person right here. And we need to deal with this person right here the way we can, with social media. And the thing about social media is, and going to what Barry said, is like communication is such a nuanced thing. Like social media is such a bad way to communicate, at least from how we're so used to communicating as human beings. Like there's so much thing. There's a lot of nuance to what I say to people and how I show that with my body language, with all the nuance that comes with communication. And social media takes all of that out and just gives you the text. So I think maybe that's what makes cancel culture so heightened, is that we actually don't know how this person said it, but because we're in this point of aggression, this point of this person is wrong, I'm going to interpret it like this, and then it just turns into this big bomb called cancel culture. But I don't think it's completely a bad idea, a bad idea, and I'll give you 2 points why. One, because cancel culture empathizes with the victim. And two, cancel culture just shows you where the real problem lies. But me, of course, I still don't like cancel culture, but I get it. And that's what I
Sure.
wanted to say.
Amazing, sir.
I
Amazing,
think
sir.
that's an important point that you make, is that there's two sides to cancel culture. And I think that once again, if you dumb the word down, and excuse me using that word, because that's what we do in the digital space. We dumb down things to two words: cancel culture. But cancel culture, as you said earlier, is a highly complex thing. And we sort of simplified by saying it's a judgment, it's a disapproval. And I think the other thing that we need to look at is that it's not only used in injustice. It's not only used when people do wrong. You can be cancelled if you're doing right, and somebody doesn't like it. So it can, and that's what makes it so complex, is that whilst we say it's looking at injustices and it's looking at judging people according to do what they and calling them out for doing wrong. Whose wrong is it very
Yeah.
often? And I think that's where the complexity comes in.
So I
Uh,
wanna sorry, Sonny, do you wanna go ahead?
Yes, yes, please. I just want to just what on Barry has said. So, cancel culture is very complex, and later on we will explore the idea of because what is right to Nopi may not necessarily be right to Shoni, which is something else that we would need to explore. But right now, I just want to find out then, in your view. So, one, call out culture is not something that is foreign to Christian culture. Jesus called out people for things that they did, But at the very same time, in Matthew, we are almost given a method, a way in which we are meant to call each other out. The author of Matthew once suggests that, look, if your brother wrongs you, go to him, talk to him about it. If he still does not listen and is still continuing with whatever he's doing, call someone else. And if it still is not, if the conflict is still not resolved between you guys, take it to the church, whatever the case might be. So we're almost given this method, but this method does not give any provision for how to deal with this on a digital space, and especially in a globalized world where we have access to one another, but we can't really access each other. For me to call a particular music artist and say, listen, I don't like what you wrote about in your music, you know so how then, what then would we say? Would we say when Christians, or rather when Christians hold other people accountable, should we follow this method and not cancel each other out? Or is there something that we can take from this method and bring it into cancel culture as seen and understood on digital spaces?
Shoni, just to kind of comment on what you've said, I think the one thing that we need to do as Christians and as the church is normalize having conversations with people. I do believe in calling someone out and holding people accountable and things like that. However, there are ways to communicate with different people. As Nopi had mentioned in the beginning, she is her own person with her own views, her understandings, and her experiences. So because of that, I have to tailor make every single, when I'm approaching her with a conversation about something, I need to approach it because, okay, I'm speaking to Nopi and this was her experience, or this is how she experienced something. And maybe in the social media realm, or in the church realm as well, it's not the same in a sense that people know each other on a one-on-one basis, which is why I think it's so important to have people who you are in relationship with in whatever form to be able to hold you accountable for certain actions and things like that. And I think it does start with your inner circles. I know if we're looking at the whole hashtag men are trash thing, you look in your circles first. How are your friends treating other women? Are you allowing your friends to treat women in a way that is not accepted and things like that? So are you having those conversations in your circles before we now put it on social media and blow it up? And I think by the time it gets to social media, the conversations happened not once, but more than once and consecutively. And I think that's where the issue comes in, is that because we kind of want to tiptoe around certain conversations, be like, oh no, but it's okay. Like, you only did it once, or it's a mistake, or we're not actually saying, okay, cool, look, this is wrong. And this is not right. You've hurt someone else's feelings, or this certain group of people feel disrespected and things like that. This is why they feel disrespected. How did you come to the conclusion of feeling like this, or whatever the case may be? So it's normalizing having those conversations and saying, no, Sims, I actually don't appreciate this a certain way that you've spoken to me, and not to be disrespectful about it, but just to say, hey dude, I don't appreciate that, and it actually makes me feel sad, and I'm not okay, or whatever it is. So I think that's where we need to begin as a church, personally for me, because I think if we want to be people who are going to change and want to be like Jesus. Yes, Jesus did call out people, but he did it in a way that was loving. He did it in a way that was graceful and that was merciful. But I'm not saying that people must just get away with murder and things like that, but there needs to be a way in that we start having these conversations in order to help people. Because sometimes people aren't aware of the things that they're doing. I can say that for myself as well, in a particular situation where you don't really understand the effect you have on someone else, and then you have to go and do your own growing and your understanding to then come back. So I hope that don't know if everyone else has comments, but that's just
It's
where I'm at.
Seeps, maybe let me just, because I see I realize Nopi just wants to give input into this one, but maybe just to qualify it for everyone. My issue here is that cancel culture has helped us track down bullies with power and money that would not be called out by a mere hloni. People who have been able to organize systems around them that can easily take you out should you try to cancel them out as an individual, you know, and it has helped us do that. But at the very same time, my issue is when you look at this biblical approach to accountability, it almost creates a very credible system that can hold people accountable, you know. Whereas with cancel culture, you've got unqualified people you can be cancel, cancel culture, social media cancel culture can be so weird at times. You can have people canceling you out for getting a divorce and yet they've never been married or do not even understand the complexities of marriage, and therefore it's not credible in my view when it comes to issues like that. So how do we hold each other accountable in a way that does not go against good practices? Yeah.
Sure. So firstly, I just want to say this is so interesting. I've been waiting for a conversation that racks my brain and just being able to listen to what everyone's been able to share. So I think that, I've been thinking about it a lot in terms of, being a Christian and how I'm able to navigate being a Christian, but still, having my own beliefs and opinions and ways of doing things and understanding things. And I think that's a very complex one because I think so often the world tries to insert some sort of prototype of the ideal Christian. This is how you're meant to be as a Christian. This is how you're meant to treat people as a Christian. And if you don't treat people like this as a Christian, then unfortunately, then you do not sort of fit the prototype. And I think that's a problem first. I think that as Christians, we first need to realize that we too are just as human as every single other person. I think as Christians, we need to realize that we do get angry. We do have feelings. We do get hurt. We do have ways of, speaking out in such a way that it's actually not okay. And I think that's what we need to do first, to shy away from wanting to be the ideal prototype of a Christian who is someone who is consistently loving all the time, someone who's always so great and so kind and so wonderful, because unfortunately at the end of the day we're human beings, and human beings were bred out of imperfection. We are imperfect, and I think that's what we need to understand first. So when it comes to be then first of all understanding our imperfections, and first of all understanding that none of us actually fit the ideal prototype of a Christian, because ideally speaking there shouldn't actually be an ideal prototype of what it means to be a Christian. Instead, I think as Christians, in order to truly be somewhat, close to that prototype, if it even exists, is being able to be authentic enough to recognize our flaws, right? And then secondly, by being able to recognize our flaws, that is what enables us to have more courageous conversations with people. That is what enables us to then step into these different conversations, whether it be conversations about cancel culture, whether it be conversations about mental trash, and being like, what, these are the emotions and the experiences that I'm feeling. However, what is the best way to then go about tackling this? And I will admit, 100%, I think something I've had to learn is we need to be able to admit our flaws. I have engaged in conversations where I have not been loving, where I have been very much like, what, you are wrong, this is what it is, and I'm not doing this anymore. And that's because of the feelings that I was having at the time. If we go to something where some people might call it controversial, and I don't think it's controversial, I think it's pretty obvious, is the whole idea of Black Lives Matter, right? That's the whole idea of people coming into the space on social media and everyone being able to hide behind screens, having their own opinions, having their own conversations, but ideally speaking, we end up missing the point of why is Black Lives Matter actually important? Why is it something that we should be engaging in? But I think the problem with social media is that it gives people this platform to hide behind the screen. And I think, what was alluded to earlier before we started this recording is that as human beings right now, we're living in a virtual space. So when you live in a virtual space, you can basically say what you want to say, how you want to say it, because at the end of the day, it's not like you're sitting in a room full of people and you're saying what you're saying, and people, like what Sim said, people are seeing your body language and how you're expressing yourself. Because if we think about how human beings actually communicate, a large percentage of our communication is actually from our body language, right? But when you go onto social media, you don't have that. So you say what you want to say and how you want to say it. So I think like it's really complex for me to try and figure out like what is the best way to handle social media conflict or social media cancel culture, because that is a space that people feel like they can say whatever they want to say and however they want to say it. Yeah, sure. I mean, you can go into someone's DMs and be like, hey, listen, I saw that you said this. I didn't really agree with what you said, blah, blah, blah. And that's great, right? But how many people actually even want to engage in something like that? How many people actually want to be like, okay, you know what, dude? I get you. I'm going to respond to your Instagram now. Like, let's have an actual conversation. How many people are going to do that, right? And I think the other problem is that, you know, when you have things like cancel culture, you have large groups of people who are then backing each other up. You know what I mean? And that's what makes it even more complex, is that it's not one person saying one thing. It's one person saying one thing, which ultimately represents what thousands of other people are thinking. And then you have like these different groups, this polarization that happens on social media. So I think that's something I'm still trying to grapple with, and it's really complex, in which I'm really honest about, is that I really don't know how as a Christian I can separate, you know, my feelings and my ways of understanding the world and dealing with the world in such a space such as social media, which is so incredibly complex. And I think sometimes you also feel like, okay, but if I am the objective person or the neutral person and say like, listen guys, I think it's important for us to have conversations, to speak, people cancel you for saying that because they're saying that no, you can't say that. You must have like an opinion. You must say what you want to say. Something's wrong, something's wrong. You can't be, you know, you can't be that person who's like, no guys, we need to chat, we need to speak. People cancel you for saying that, you know. And I think that's something I'm always constantly thinking about, especially on Twitter. When I see Twitter, when I see what people are saying, and I'm trying to think to myself, can I tweet right now that, you know what guys, I think we actually need to start to, you know, redefine how we understand communication and stuff, because by saying that, then someone feels like you're invalidating their experiences. So what we have, and excuse me for going on a tangent, is just this, you know, domino effect of this constant invalidation of experience. And then where do we end up? You know, so like what I'm saying now, everything that I'm saying now is just proving how complex the situation is. And I think it's even harder, you know, trying to stick to your Christian values and trying to ensure that, you know, that you're being, you know, the person that, you know, God wants you to be, who's the person who, you know, is calling for peace, who is calling for such a way that you are transforming into a world that values inclusivity, that values difference, that values, you know, accessibility, and ensuring that people have a voice. But at the same time, we're living in a world where ultimately we're all on edge. Everything is changing. We're all on edge. Sometimes we don't have time for compassion because of the fact that we're so on edge. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear what anyone has to say. But yeah, it's racking my brain completely.
Nopi, I can only say when I hear somebody talk like you are now, it once again assures me of the importance of our youth in South Africa today, because I think your insight, that what you've just said now, encapsulates what I've been seeing now for the last, I've been studying youth behavior for 30 years, not as a psychologist, but as somebody that looks at why young people make certain decisions. And I've been fascinated by, especially in the last couple of years, as I've seen young people emerge with a voice like yours, because I think the one thing that you've just what's the word I'm looking for? You've just shown us is just how important it is for clarity. You know, I think the one thing that we've learned, that the digital space does not provide clarity. We can talk about understanding one another. We can talk about this, that, and the other thing, and you know, all sounds very good. But when we talk and we provide clarity to others, that's when the barriers break down. And I just want to comment on what Shloni said, is that, you know, you, and I think you did this purposefully, Shloni, so assist me if I'm wrong. You separated the concept of a cancel culture and a call-out culture. And I think that there's a very, very thin line between the two. We've thrown this word of accountability out a lot. And I mean, it's good that young people today can call out the things that are not ethical, are not godly, etc. But I think that We have to separate that. And that's what we can do as a church. We can have a call out culture. But I think the moment we step into that area of a cancel culture, we're stepping into an area that is devoid of compassion and devoid of grace. So I think the call out culture is something I would happily say that the church needs to get on involved with. The cancel culture, in terms of my definition, and once again, I haven't defined it, so there's no clarity in it, but I do think that there's a clear divide for the church. The thing is, we're in a world, and I'm going to quote somebody who I read recently who said, there's too much demand and not enough solutions. So what's very, very important about young people today is they make a lot of demands on society, and yet we don't have all the solutions. I think where cancel culture and call out culture fails is that they call people out without having a solution. And I think that's where it becomes a judgment as opposed to a constructive call out. And I think that's also what the digital space doesn't allow. So when, for instance, you refer to the terms, I mean, I've been called a white savior for trying to start feeding schemes for children in the Transkei. I mean, I don't know why, but it's a hurtful statement. But why? You ask yourself the question, is that a cancel culture thing? Or is that just something that somebody says and a whole lot of people follow? And that's where we have to be careful as a church, because we have to understand what I said last week, and Nopi, you said it too, is that we get bombarded with all of these people that support our views. But that's AI following you. We have to understand that somebody else has cancelled that idea or that person, and there's hundreds of thousands of people that are being supported on that side. So, and so we have to understand, and I think that's what made it so clear for me when you were talking, is that if we can understand the complexity and how these things sort of mesh together, we as a church will have a better understanding of our role. And that's why I say we almost have to step back into, and I mentioned it last week as well, the liminal space, that space between all of these groups. And I had an interesting discussion with somebody the other day, Nopi, who said, you know what, I don't get myself involved in that extreme or that extreme. So I said, well, you're a bait ball like many others. Everybody's saying I'm not going to get myself involved. So you've created your own bait ball. Your people like yourself. So where do you stand? Now I stand nowhere. Standing nowhere is also a place. So I think that what we as a church have to seek is clarity. And we can only seek that clarity by actually stepping back and getting a different perspective. It's understanding, as Nopi said, my context, my experience. When I have a look at your experience and I say, okay, my experience is this, I understand the difference. I then don't have to create conflict about it. And that's where the good discussions come in. But in the digital space especially, and through the distancing that we've made as a man-made decision to distance ourselves, it's not the coronavirus that's made that. That distancing has polarized us even further. And that's why we can't have these discussions. So sorry, that's just my response to what you've said.
It's interesting, Barry. Just before Sims goes in and Seeps takes us forward, what I'm interested also in is, the idea of, so there's call outs within a church context, but we also have the idea of excommunication, where when certain people are beyond reproach, we've tried everything in our power as a community, but their existence continues to pose a threat against the existence of others in the same community. Then you've got a very similar concept to cancel culture, because what we're saying is that your existence is a threat to everyone else. When the existence of and I'm going to use just a trigger alert, I'm going to use something really extreme. Let's say, for instance, a pedophile who is been able to protect himself using money, using all systems that is employed around himself to take out anyone who dare stands up against him and his behavior. And cancel culture goes out and it manages to get this guy cancelled from society to a point that even the justice system is under pressure to make sure that this particular case is dealt with properly. As a Christian, I think to myself there, geez, this was good progress. Because I also think of the many other people who have been victims, many other people who have been victims of such behavior, how they would have felt on a day-to-day basis coming across this profile that continues with life as normal as though there's nothing abnormal about what they did. And in the same thing within a church context, we've got people who have done bad things against other congregation members. And so if I was heading over a church and there was someone who genuinely doesn't want to be held accountable for their behavior and they continue to go on as though everything is normal, even Paul says, excommunicate that person. So how can we then, where do we draw the line? Because there is the call out, but I'm not sure if the church only stops by the call out culture. There is that other extreme, which is cancel culture, which can be used in certain situations. Now, how do we use that space?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I just don't think. Once again, I say that's why my concept of a cancel culture might be different to yours. I still call that a call-out culture. If you take Weinstein, for instance, that was a call-out issue. People called out until he faced the music. They didn't cancel him, because if they cancelled him, what would have happened is you would have just disappeared. Because that's what cancelling does. It unpersons you. You're still a person. And that's what I think he was called to accountability. Cancel culture, I don't believe once again, it's about language. So we might be talking about semantics here. But let's take Gracepoint Church, for instance. If there are people that are undermining the church, that are bringing a sense of evil into the church, the first thing we do is the call-out culture, all right? That issue of communication is to cut him off. It's not to cancel him, right? Jesus walked away from things he couldn't change. We walk away from those people. And it doesn't mean that to me, canceling somebody is almost like demonizing them. And I think I wrote an article to you once where I said we have to be careful of our language, because if we start using language that cancels people, like, for instance, if I'm called a social or a spiritual slut, for instance, and I'm a member of the church, and it's somebody in the church that says that to me, is that cancel culture, or is that a call out? And that's the difference that I'm saying, is that to call out somebody is to go the Matthew route, all right? As a church, I do believe that we have to wipe our feet off people. Now, just remember that in terms of social justice, if you want to call it that, and once again, I'm open to definitions because we all have a different experience about it. But to me, social justice is if somebody does you wrong, you ignore them. You cut them out of your life. You show them that they don't belong. That's excommunication in my view. The leadership go to that person and say, we don't want you in the church for the following reasons. That's up to the church. And I think that's cancel culture. It's not up to every congregant in the church canceling that guy through social media by telling everybody what a horrible person it is. Imagine what would have happened had anybody chosen sides in the division that we've had in our church, with the divorce that we've had in our church. Imagine what cancel culture would have done to our church. And I think to a degree there was some. And that's why it's been so hurtful. However, the church handled it the proper way, through a system that exists for dealing with issues like that, and separating the hurt and the stigma that could go with it in a way that is amicable, that shows compassion, care, and the grace of God. So, I don't know if I brought some clarity to my what I said earlier.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's just a definition thing, really. I think we're all definitely speaking about the same thing. Um, I think from an individual point of view, I want you to know personally, for me, I'm definitely not pro cancel culture. But I know what I'm about to say is definitely not leaning towards that at all. Okay. Um, I think as an individual, cancel culture is it's more complex than what we think it is, and I think like we're definitely seeing it from a personal point of view, and I think I really resonate with what Shoni said. I think, or let me start off by saying I I can't make that decision for the church. I can't tell the church what kind of personality they need to be concerning cancel culture. I don't know what's the right way to go about it. I think being in the digital space as a society is still a very new thing to us. And I think we have to approach it as if we're a child who just got a new toy. And our new toy is the internet. Like we're still trying to figure out our way around, this digital space, this internet space, social media. We're still very, very young into this thing, and we're gonna make a lot of mistakes. But I do think like the generation after us is definitely gonna look back and be like, "Yo, these were the mistakes that these people made. How can we improve? How can we not improve?" So I think the church needs to figure out where they are in that space. And I do think the church needs to get a definitive personality. And it's not always going to be an easy one where you make hard decisions, but definitely each church needs to have its own personality. I think, I think I'm starting to think cancel culture is a really good thing. I think in the sense of it's just roughening up the feathers. It's just waking up the people, making them realize that man, not everything is going the way we want it to go. I think, like when I think about, I do think it can go to the extreme of like when you were saying with divorce, like because like cancel culture literally can make people lose money. For instance, like the whole Java situation, like he started losing gigs because like people were canceling, him. Whether he was right or wrong, it doesn't matter. But it was affecting his like livelihood, and it was affecting his way of living, right? And that's what makes it very difficult for us to like navigate like through cancer culture. But at the end of the day, it's still like a really good thing because we're able to put like figures at a place where they would not have been before. We might not get it right all the time. It's not a foolproof thing, but it's definitely changing um, how we look at these people and how we look at individuals and how we can deal with them on a bigger and greater scale. Granted, it's not perfect, but it's definitely like pointing to issues within like our society. And I think the church just needs to figure out a way of figuring out which ones are the wins and which ones are the losses. Um, Definitely always educating their members, always educating like the Christians in a larger scheme. Like, what is it that we can learn from this?
Amazing. I think we just lost Sims there for a second, but I think we get the gist of what he's saying. Nopi, I don't know if you want to take a. I realize you unmiked.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to comment on the whole idea of, cancel culture sort of being a good thing in terms of ruffling feathers. And I wanted to sort of give an example. So, being at Stellenbosch University as a black woman, which is a historically white and Afrikaans university, there's certain things that you go through from like sort of a social perspective. There's certain experiences that you have. There's a certain type of superiority complex, where white and Afrikaans people in the Stellenbosch space have the sense of entitlement or whatever it may be, right? So, for example, there may be like quite a controversial thing that happens, and I've had many of these experiences, and it's sort of like the first time you speak to someone, you're like, listen, I really didn't like it, like when you said that or when that happened, and it made me really upset, specifically because I thought it was quite racist and I didn't like it, and I would appreciate if that didn't happen again, right? So you do that the first time, then you do it the second time, it happens again, and the second time you're like, whew, you're like, listen, we had this conversation, I said that this is how I felt, and I would really appreciate it if you just wouldn't do this anymore. The third time it happens again, you reach a stage where you're tired and you don't have time to say again, please, can you not do this again? You get me? And I think that's something that how I think of cancel culture, or maybe its origin sometimes, is that it sort of reaches a stage where people are now tired of constantly being like, please don't do this. Please don't say this. So you reach a point where you're like, what is the most extreme way that I can get my point across so that you can at least listen to me, right? And that's what happens. I mean, at Stellenbosch University, there have been so many sort of student-led protests where it was like, there were constantly conversations being had with, let's say, management or this or that. The conversations are happening, but the conversations were just conversations. So eventually students were like, this is enough now. I'm so tired of telling you this. You're saying you're going to make a policy change. You're saying you're going to do that. So what can I do to ruffle the most feathers so I can get a response so that we can actually then start working towards a solution, right? And I think that that was really the origin, for me at least, of cancel culture, of participating in it. Is how do we get people to listen in such a way where they actually have to grapple with things that are hard? And no one wants to talk about things that make them uncomfortable, things that are like a bit sensitive, because no one really knows how to grapple with that. But unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, what cancel culture, I guess, has done, which is in sort of a good way, I suppose, when it's for the right situation, is it said, this is an issue, we need to start talking about it now. And after we've spoken about it, we need to start looking for solutions, because we can't keep on saying every single year, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem, and then 10 years later we're still saying it's a problem, but we're not actually reaching some sort of solution. So that's what I just wanted to say about the ruffling the feathers. And this, just quickly going then back to then what's the sort of the role or the duty of the church. Something I realized and what I wrote down here is that I think as Christians and as a church, it's our duty to facilitate the process of transformation. It's our duty to facilitate the process of transforming ourselves into a world whereby we value diversity, we value inclusivity, we value, the coexistence of various lived experiences. But I think that what the church also needs to stop trying to do is also stop trying to please everyone, because you can't please everyone, because you're going to have people who step into the space who don't actually want to live in a space or live or be part of a church or a community that values transformation. And unfortunately, as a church, you have to now develop a mandate where you're saying, we're not going to deal with this. This is where we're taking the church. We're sticking towards going with this process of transformation. If you want to fall in line, fall in line. And if you don't want to fall in line, unfortunately, there's nothing we can do for you because we have this vision, So I think at the same time, the church, and I think just leadership in general, needs to stick with their mandate. If your mandate is creating a transformative space whereby there's this coexistence of lived experiences, then stick to that mandate and stop always trying to please people who don't want to be a part of that mandate. Unfortunately, the only way we're ever going to get into a space where we're truly valuing difference and diversity is if we actually stick to it and we say, like, for example, like in Stellenbosch, alumni most of the time don't agree with a lot of the changes that are happening. But what my thing is if you don't agree as an alumni, unfortunately, we can't help you because we're trying to get to a specific way of being where we're getting better and we're not staying backwards. And I think that's what the church needs to do. And that's what leadership needs to do in general, is take a stance, stick by it. People will criticize because that's what the world does. The world critiques every single day, but we keep moving forward. As we say now, we move, So that's it. Yeah.
Look, Nopi, you made a very valid point there, and Sims, you touched on it as well. I think when it comes to that, what I appreciate the most about cancel culture is that it's actually put people who have been doing wrong into touch, and it has ruffled feathers. It has brought people to justice as well, which is something I can completely appreciate about cancel culture, because at the end of the day, how long can you say to someone, I don't like this, I don't appreciate this, this is not right? And we see it more and more every single day. I don't know how often it is on my social media where I come across, especially now with all the lootings that have happened in the past 2 weeks and things like that, with all of that information. First of all, as a country, we are exhausted. As a Black woman, I am tired of constantly having to speak up, one for my people, one for my culture, and for who I am. And so when you get to the point where you're tired of having conversations with people and giving people the leeway to continue to do and make the comments that they are, because you hear, I think I have a friend, but my friend is also racist. So what do? I'm sharing my, understandings with my friend, and I'm saying, okay, cool, friend, this is not okay. Like, you can't say this kind of stuff, or you do realize that this is happening because of A, B, and C. And if you, as my friend and someone who knows who I am, cannot appreciate that and understand that, for me, I can let you go. I can move on, because we can't. And you're right, Nobi, in a sense that the church needs to choose where they're standing, because you can stay with someone who's constant. We have the understanding of the love of God, because God's love is constant. It doesn't change. God's rules stand as they are. And we still follow those, even though maybe sometimes we don't understand them. Maybe sometimes we don't necessarily, want to conform to them, but we know because that's who God is. And that's the same thing with the church. If you want us to follow or understand a certain part, or if you want to be a part of something, decide where you want to stand, and then who wants to follow you or who would like to be in that same understanding will then stay there. And I think personally, for me, as someone who is an avid social media I would say influencer and being an artist and all that kind of stuff, I've had a conversation with a friend of mine where we spoke about obviously my journey as an artist, and obviously with releasing music and music videos and things like that. And I have had questions from Christians about my faith, purely because of what I release as an artist. And I think we need to come to the point where we allow people to feel what they need to feel and experience what they need to experience, without completely ostracizing them and things like that. When it comes to having an opinion and it being a fact, we need to start differentiating that between the two as Christians as well, and as people of the world. Because you can come to a conversation with someone with your own opinion and in a way kind of enforce that as a fact, which sometimes isn't true. So I think when it comes to cancel culture, when you do have an opinion about something, make sure you know that it's your opinion and it's not a fact. If you don't understand something, research it, learn more about it, understand it. Because I think the one thing that we are missing maybe as people sometimes, is that we don't have the facts of where everything started. We have our opinions. We know what we're going to do to these people. We know what we're going to change. Or, oh my gosh, we don't like black people because this is what's happening, and look at this is what they do. But if we look at the facts, if we look at where black people have come from, if we look at where could potentially black people be going, then we can start understanding, okay, cool, this is what we need to do. These are the conversations we need to have. These are the changes that need to be made. These are the people we need to have a conversation with. And that's why I say I can appreciate cancel culture, because it's calling people to order. I think that's one thing that I, as a human being, am starting to understand being important in my own personal life, is that even when I do something, I need to be like, Zena, dude, what are you doing? This is wrong. You know that this is wrong. And it's hard sometimes to sit back and think, okay, cool, I made a mistake, or I said something that was wrong. But at the end of the day, it is important for me to realize that that is wrong. And that's why I agree to a certain extent about cancel culture, because I do understand that there's certain things that need to change in our society. There's certain things that need to be unlearned, and we need to relearn how to treat human beings. We need to relearn how to live as people of Christ as well. And so as also a churchgoer, I would also like to see the church stand for what they believe in. If you believe in something, stand for it, and I'll stand with you. And there's nothing better than knowing that there is there is a church or a certain body of people who believe in how to handle things in a way that is going to be helpful for everybody else around them. And some people may not believe that. And that's also fine. And we also need to be okay with that. We also need to understand that it's okay for people to not accept certain things, and it's not our place to change what they want to accept and what they don't want to accept. That's on their journey. That's on their understanding.
But
That's
see,
where I
see, I love what you said, and I also want to just give time to Barry, because I know he also wanted to add around that. We've got a few minutes left, but just an interesting maybe perspective, or rather something else we can explore, is now we need to understand that cancel culture. We may not cancel, though people may be cancelled from our spaces, particularly on social media. They are not necessarily cancelled from every space that exists within social media. Cancel culture can be fueled by a prevailing ideological orthodoxy in a particular group, as AI forces you into a particular part of social media. And it might not necessarily be the truth in another group, And so we then need to understand that when we come together on a Sunday, as a church, we have people who belong to different groups on the digital space. You know, even though we are in the same place, even though we believe in the same Jesus, but we've got different groups that are informed by different ideologies. And so then, how then do we hold this tension? An example that I think of, for instance, I look on social media, there are two walls on Twitter, literally. You know, you find that in the past 2 weeks, you've got one wall that is saying, well done to the president on how he's managed everything, that has been happening around us. And on the other hand, you've got the 500 billion brigades that are saying, but he stole 500 billion, and it is so interesting because the facts around that are actually funny. But the fact of the matter is that you've got these two walls. In this one, you find that you've got a lot of people who believe that, look, the president is not the ideal person to lead the country. And then you've got people who are like, yo, this is our president, man. He's really doing well. Now, on a Sunday morning, you've got these two groups in one space. And now, as a church, in as much as you are pushing for justice, the dilemma then is that who do I accommodate? Which narrative do I push? Which narrative do I hold? Or do I decide not to say anything as a church? Do I decide to just keep quiet around political issues? And I suppose that also then informs our stance, even on social media. What are your thoughts? How do we hold this very difficult place at the very same time without neglecting our mission, which is, one, to liberate the poor, to liberate, to help those who are poor, to make sure that the poor eat, to organize ourselves around the marginalized. That's what Jesus literally spent his entire life doing.
Yeah, that's why I keep coming back to the fact that we have to understand that we're living in a polarized world, and the one place that we do find ourselves coming together is under the mantle of God. And I think that's what we mustn't forget as Christians. I just want to come back to, I've listened very carefully, and I don't know if I'm hearing correctly, but perhaps there's a bit of a dichotomy here. So let me just clear it up. We keep saying that the church must. We are the church. So when we say the church must give their stance on this, or the church must be clear on this, and the church must be clear on that, I'm the sort of person, I stood up in that one meeting and I said, are we going to allow what you refer to as the church dictate what this church is going to be, or are we as the church going to dictate what this church would be in the future? And we have to grapple with that question, because I think, Zena, you've actually mentioned it now, is that we have to be part of that change. We have to collaborate together, because we can have all the discussions in the world about issues. But when we start getting together and starting to talk about our church, it's a very, very different thing, because then we're going to be starting to talk about the issues in the context of our belief, in the context of God, and in the context of the world. Because one of the things and it's one of the big changes, there's three massive changes that have happened over the last 3 years. The one is the way we exchange with one another, the value of what we say, and we've spoken a bit about that. That's changed incredibly in terms of the media. The second thing is that there's the economics has been pushed into a situation that has changed so dramatically that we are looking for a solution. And that comes down to social justice as well. The third issue is, what is truth? And that's where I believe, and I've been saying for the last year, is that it's great to have hot topics, but at the end of a hot topics, we need to understand that people want to know, well, what is the church's stance on issue A or issue B? What is the stance of our church, our people, you, me, the Methodist Church, on the cancel culture? What I've heard today is that there's different viewpoints, and what's nice is that there's been clarity about it. But actually, what is our stance on it, Shloni? Have we clarified that for people who watch Hot Topics? Or are we leaving the response to this on their own? because we as the church have to give them that answer. And I think that's what Zena's been saying all along, is that without participation of everybody, we're going to have these polarized issues. And the church is the place to come and talk about what we want our church to be. As long as our church is a place where we come to on Sundays, we're not going to have those conversations. The moment we start deciding that our church is a place to engage one another in the context of our biblical grace, then we're going to get somewhere. And that's, I believe, a process that we're going to head into the next couple of months, is where we come together. I don't know if that makes sense, Zena,
Yeah,
to all
thank
of
you so
you.
much, Barry. And this has been such an incredible conversation, guys. I honestly really appreciate your honesty and your heart and coming forward with your beliefs and your understanding of what cancel culture is. And as Barry did say, I think it is important for us as individuals who belong to a body. We also need to put our foot down and decide where we stand, and join that fight, or that understanding, or that heart that beats for what is important and what we need in our society. It's so great to have you guys join us for this conversation. There are definitely going to be more conversations that we're going to have, unpacking these different understandings of where we stand on the social space. So please keep following us on social media to see when we have our next Hot Topic series, which we'll post on our social media pages. And again, have a lovely, beautiful week. Have an incredible Sunday, and we will see you all very, very soon. Thank you so much. Lots of love. Keep safe and stay warm.